People think property theft starts with a crowbar. Mine started with 58 empty driveways. When the first sunrise painted Willow Creek estates in soft shades of gold, the neighborhood looked almost peaceful. Sprinklers hissed across perfect green lawns. Wind chimes danced lazily on polished front porches. Fresh coffee drifted through open kitchen windows. Then the screaming started. One garage door after another rolled upward, revealing nothing but smooth concrete where luxury SUVs, lifted pickups, sports cars, and polished family sedans had been parked only hours earlier. Confused voices echoed through the subdivision. Car alarms chirped in the distance as key fobs searched for vehicles that simply weren't there anymore. Someone shouted that their brand-new Tahoe had been stolen. Another neighbor insisted it had to be some organized crime ring. Within minutes, people in expensive golf shirts and designer workout clothes were standing barefoot in the middle of the street, staring at dozens of empty driveways like they had all woken up inside the same impossible dream. I watched the entire scene from my front porch with a mug of black coffee warming my hands. The morning air still carried the faint smell of fresh asphalt mixed with damp Texas soil, a smell that had made my stomach turn every single day for the past 3 weeks. Across the entrance of the subdivision, flashing amber lights reflected off chrome tow trucks that were already miles away by then. Every one of those missing vehicles had left legally. Every driver who had signed the towing paperwork had followed the law exactly as written. Every deputy who stood by that morning had quietly confirmed the same thing. Nobody had stolen a single car. They had all been removed from private property by its lawful owner. Me. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 44 years old, and before retirement, I spent 2 decades developing commercial properties across Texas. Shopping centers, distribution yards, industrial parks. I learned early that land isn't protected by fences. It's protected by paperwork. My father used to tell me that concrete eventually cracks, steel eventually rusts, but a properly recorded deed can outlive generations. I never forgot that lesson. 3 years earlier, when I bought this quiet ranch house on the edge of Willow Creek Estates, I paid $80,000 extra for one feature most buyers completely ignored. A narrow gravel road stretching nearly 400 yards from the county highway to my front gate. It wasn't part of the subdivision. It wasn't governed by the HOA. It wasn't shared access. That road existed on its own deed, recorded decades before the first luxury home was ever built nearby. I paid every extra dollar without hesitation because privacy isn't something you borrow. You own it. Or at least, that's what I believed until the morning I opened my front door to the roar of diesel engines, the sting of hot tar in the air, and the sickening realization that someone had paved over my $80,000 private road while I was asleep. The road had never been an accident. My father, Daniel Brooks, believed that every piece of land should have one thing nobody else could take away: independent access. Back in 1986, long before luxury homes surrounded these rolling hills outside Austin, he purchased a narrow strip of land connecting our property directly to the county highway. Most people thought he was wasting money. $80,000 for a gravel road sounded ridiculous, especially when there was already a proposed subdivision entrance on the development plans. Dad just smiled, folded the paperwork, and locked it inside his old steel file cabinet. He always said that roads decided who truly controlled land. If someone else controlled your only entrance, they eventually controlled everything behind it. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Years later, after spending 20 years negotiating commercial developments across Texas, I realized he had been absolutely right. Developers fought harder over easements than they fought over buildings. Roads created leverage. Roads created value. Roads created power. When I inherited the ranch after my parents passed away, I could have sold the access strip separately for a small fortune. Several investors actually made offers. One builder wanted to connect 2 future neighborhoods through it. Another promised to double my investment if I granted public access. I turned every one of them down. I did not buy privacy because it was profitable. I bought it because I wanted peace. Every morning, I loved hearing my tires crunch across loose limestone gravel instead of speeding traffic racing toward another subdivision. The sound reminded me that every inch beneath those tires belonged to my family. Even the old weathered sign near the highway made me smile every time I drove past it. Private road. No public access. Most people glanced at it without a second thought. I saw my father standing beside that sign with a post-hole digger, sweat soaking through his denim shirt under the August sun. He built more than a road. He built a boundary. Willow Creek Estates arrived decades later. Beautiful homes, perfect landscaping, decorative fountains, expensive vehicles parked in spotless driveways. At first, I had no problem with any of it. My closest neighbors waved whenever they drove by. Kids rode bicycles along their own streets. Families walked their dogs every evening. We respected each other's space because there was a clear line between my property and theirs. That changed the day Vivian Ashcroft became president of the Homeowners Association. She was the kind of person who smiled with perfect confidence while quietly rearranging other people's lives. She drove a pearl white BMW X7 that somehow looked freshly detailed every single morning. Her conversations always sounded pleasant until you realized every compliment came attached to a suggestion. Every suggestion slowly became an expectation, and every expectation somehow transformed into a rule. During our first conversation, she admired my property for almost 5 minutes before casually asking why my private road was not available for community access. I laughed because I assumed she was joking. She did not laugh back. Instead, she looked straight at the gravel stretching behind me and said something I did not fully understand until weeks later. That road could make this entire neighborhood more valuable, Ethan. It is a shame only one family gets to enjoy it. After that conversation, I started noticing things I had ignored before. Vivian never walked through the neighborhood without stopping to study my entrance. She would stand beside the decorative stone wall at the edge of Willow Creek Estates with a clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses hiding her eyes while she measured distances with slow, deliberate steps. At first I assumed she was planning landscaping improvements. Then survey flags began appearing closer and closer to my property line. Bright orange markers poked through the gravel shoulder like tiny warning signs. Every few days another one appeared. I pulled them out twice, assuming a contractor had made a mistake, but by the following week they were back again. One Saturday morning, I found a glossy newsletter from the Homeowners Association folded neatly inside my mailbox. Across the front page was a full-color rendering labeled Future Grand Community Entrance. The illustration showed elegant stone columns, decorative lighting, flower beds, and a beautifully paved boulevard leading directly through the exact location where my gravel road already existed. I stared at the picture for several long seconds before checking the fine print. There was no mention of my property, no easement agreement, no purchase offer, no legal notice, just a polished drawing that quietly assumed my road already belonged to them. I drove straight to the monthly Homeowners Association meeting even though I was not a member. The clubhouse smelled like fresh coffee and vanilla candles, and cheerful conversations stopped the moment I walked inside. Vivian welcomed everyone with the polished confidence of someone hosting a charity gala instead of a neighborhood meeting. When the presentation reached the proposed entrance project, she smiled toward the audience and spoke about improving traffic flow, increasing home values, and creating a more prestigious identity for Willow Creek Estates. Then she pointed directly at the rendering of my road. I raised my hand immediately. The room fell silent as I asked one simple question. Who authorized construction on private property? Vivian barely hesitated. She smiled the same calm smile I had seen before and answered that the community had every expectation of reaching a reasonable solution with neighboring landowners. The way she said neighboring landowners made it sound as though I lived miles away instead of directly behind the drawing on the projector screen. Several residents nodded without asking another question. Most of them probably assumed agreements had already been signed. Why would they think otherwise? Everything on the screen looked official. After the meeting ended, Vivian caught up with me in the parking lot. The evening air carried the scent of freshly cut grass, while sprinklers clicked rhythmically across nearby lawns. She folded her hands politely and told me I should think about the greater good of the community. She explained that shared access would reduce congestion and improve property values for everyone, including me. I told her the answer was still no. Her smile remained, but something behind it changed. It became colder, tighter, almost mechanical. Before walking away, she glanced toward my road one more time and quietly said, "Sometimes progress does not wait for permission." I watched her white sport utility vehicle disappear around the corner, and for the first time since moving there, The familiar crunch of gravel beneath my boots no longer sounded peaceful. It sounded like a countdown. 3 mornings later, I woke up before sunrise to a low mechanical rumble that did not belong anywhere near my property. At first I thought it was distant highway traffic carried by the cool morning air, but the vibration kept growing until the coffee inside my mug rippled across the surface. I opened my front door, and the smell hit me before the view did. Hot asphalt, diesel exhaust, freshly cut concrete. My stomach tightened as I stepped onto the porch. Floodlights washed my entire entrance in harsh white light, while paving machines crawled across my gravel road like they had every legal right to be there. Workers in reflective vests moved with practiced efficiency, spreading steaming black asphalt over the limestone my father had carefully laid decades earlier. The familiar crunch beneath my boots had already disappeared beneath a smooth layer of fresh pavement. I hurried toward the entrance, but what stopped me cold was not the construction equipment. It was everything they had already erased. The wooden sign reading Private Road had vanished. The steel survey markers installed by the county surveyor had been ripped from the ground. Even the old cedar fence posts marking the edge of my easement had been stacked neatly off to one side, as though they were nothing more than leftover scrap. I called out to the foreman and asked who authorized this project. He looked genuinely confused, glanced down at the clipboard in his hands, and answered without hesitation. The Homeowners Association approved the community entrance upgrade. We are following the site plan exactly. He even showed me the work order. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words Grand Entrance Improvement Project. My property was highlighted in bright yellow as if ownership had simply been edited with a marker. Before I could respond, another truck backed into the entrance carrying decorative stone columns wrapped in protective plastic. Workers unloaded bronze signs engraved with the words Willow Creek Estates. Someone had already decided that my private road was no longer mine. Less than an hour later, Vivian arrived wearing pressed white slacks and carrying a travel coffee cup like she was attending a ribbon-cutting ceremony instead of standing on someone else's land. She smiled as she walked across the brand-new pavement and admired the work with obvious satisfaction. "Does not this look better already?" she asked. I reminded her that she was standing on private property. She answered that appearances mattered and that the neighborhood deserved an entrance matching the value of the surrounding homes. Before leaving, she handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was an official invoice from the Homeowners Association charging me $3,200 as my share of the road improvement project, followed by a monthly maintenance assessment beginning the following month. I read every line twice because the absurdity almost made it difficult to believe. They had altered my property without permission, replaced my road with theirs, removed my boundary markers, and then billed me for the privilege. By that afternoon, the situation became even worse. Residents who had never driven near my entrance before started treating it like a public boulevard. Sport utility vehicles rolled across the fresh pavement. Delivery vans cut through my property to save a few minutes. Children rode bicycles along the shoulders while joggers waved politely, completely unaware they were crossing land that had never belonged to the community. I stood quietly beside my mailbox listening to tires glide across asphalt where loose gravel had once announced every visitor. That silence bothered me more than all the construction noise combined because it told me something dangerous had already happened. They no longer believed they were borrowing my road. They believed they owned it. I could have marched straight into a courtroom the next morning. I could have flooded the county offices with complaints, demanded emergency injunctions, or spent every waking hour arguing with people who had already convinced themselves they were right. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I slowed down. 20 years in commercial development had taught me one lesson that never failed. The person who rushed first usually lost first. I began documenting everything with quiet precision. Every morning before sunrise, I photographed the new pavement from the exact same locations. Every afternoon, I recorded the steady stream of vehicles crossing my property. Families drove through without hesitation. Delivery trucks used my road as a shortcut. Landscapers parked trailers along the shoulder while working inside the subdivision. The Homeowners Association installed decorative flower planters near the entrance, followed by matching banners welcoming visitors into Willow Creek Estates. A week later, they added a keypad gate several hundred feet beyond my property line, making it appear as though my road had always belonged to the community. Nobody questioned it because everything looked permanent. Appearance has an incredible way of convincing people that something must also be legal. My mailbox, filled with increasingly confident letters from the Homeowners Association. One demanded payment for maintenance assessments. Another reminded me that parking restrictions would soon be enforced. The third informed me that landscaping standards now applied to the entrance corridor, including trimming vegetation growing on my own property. I placed every envelope into a file cabinet without responding. Their paperwork was becoming evidence. Curious neighbors occasionally stopped to chat while walking their dogs. Most of them were friendly. A retired schoolteacher apologized for using the road because she honestly believed the community had purchased it. A young father thanked me for supporting the new entrance because he thought it made the neighborhood safer. None of them realized they were repeating the same story they had been told. I never blamed them. They had trusted the people elected to represent them. The real problem was not the residents. The problem was the people creating the illusion. One afternoon, I drove to the county offices carrying copies of my deed, survey, and property tax records. The clerk confirmed that every document still identified the road exactly as it had been for decades. Nothing had changed in the public records. Ownership remained exactly where it had always been. When I asked whether anyone had filed new easements or transfer documents, the answer was simple. No, the law still recognized the road as mine. Walking back to my truck, I realized something important. The Homeowners Association had changed the appearance of ownership without changing ownership itself. That difference mattered more than they understood. Over the following days, I noticed another pattern. More and more residents began leaving their vehicles parked along the beautifully paved entrance during community events. Visitors lined both sides of the road during weekend gatherings. Contractors left work trucks there for hours. Even Vivian parked her white sport utility vehicle near the decorative stone columns whenever she hosted neighborhood meetings. Every new tire resting on my property quietly expanded the consequences waiting in the future. I never asked anyone to move. I never raised my voice. I simply watched, took photographs, noted license plates, and organized every detail inside carefully labeled folders because somewhere beneath all that fresh asphalt, hidden from everyone except me, the original property line had never moved even a single inch. Late that Friday afternoon, I unlocked the old steel file cabinet that had belonged to my father for nearly 40 years. It sat in the corner of my workshop exactly where he had left it, scratched from decades of use, but still opening with the same heavy metallic click I remembered from childhood. Inside were neatly labeled folders arranged with the kind of discipline only an old rancher could appreciate. Property taxes, surveys, utility easements, title insurance. Beneath them rested a thick manila envelope with my father's handwriting across the front in black marker. It read simply, "Road documents." I carried it onto the workbench, brushed away a thin layer of dust, and opened it carefully. The first pages were familiar. Original purchase records, survey maps, county filings. Then I found something I had completely forgotten existed. Attached behind the recorded deed was a separate access agreement executed in 1986 and filed with the county clerk on the same day the property changed hands. Every page carried official recording stamps. Every signature had been notarized. I sat down and read every line twice. The document established the roadway as an exclusive private access easement benefiting only our property unless the owner granted written permission otherwise. There was no record of that permission ever being given. More importantly, one clause near the end caught my attention immediately. It stated that unauthorized vehicles left upon the private roadway or easement could be removed by the property owner or the owner's authorized agents in accordance with applicable state and local law after proper notice requirements had been satisfied. My father had anticipated a problem that had not even existed when he bought the land. He had protected the road long before anyone imagined a subdivision would surround it. Suddenly, dozens of small details from the previous weeks fit together like pieces of a puzzle. The decorative entrance, the community signs, the parked vehicles, the maintenance invoices. None of those actions changed ownership. They only increased the number of documented unauthorized uses occurring on private property. I made several copies of every document and scheduled meetings instead of confrontations. On Monday morning, I sat down with a real estate attorney who specialized in easements and property disputes. He studied the paperwork quietly, compared the recorded surveys with the current aerial photographs, and finally leaned back with a smile that told me everything before he even spoke. He confirmed that the recorded documents were exceptionally clear. The fresh asphalt did not transfer ownership. Decorative improvements did not transfer ownership. Homeowners Association votes did not transfer ownership. A private road remained private until its owner legally conveyed it. He recommended patience, precise documentation, and strict compliance with every notice requirement before taking any further action. That advice matched exactly what I had already been doing. Over the next several days, certified letters were prepared and mailed to the Homeowners Association, its management company, and every legally required party, explaining that the roadway remained private property and that continued unauthorized parking or use would eventually be enforced according to applicable law if the situation was not corrected. The letters were factual, professional, and impossible to misunderstand. Then I placed the signed postal receipts into the same folder as my father's documents, closed the cabinet, and realized something that finally allowed me to sleep peacefully. For the first time since the construction crews arrived, I was no longer reacting to their decisions. I was following a plan that had been waiting inside that old file cabinet for nearly 4 decades. The certified mail receipts began arriving one by one, each green card carrying another signature confirming that every required notice had been delivered. I filed them beside the original easement agreement, then waited. 7 days passed, then 10, then 14. Nothing changed. If anything, the Homeowners Association became even more confident. A weekend barbecue filled the entrance with parked vehicles from sunrise until well after dark. Visitors lined both sides of the road because the new pavement looked like convenient overflow parking. A landscaping company left 2 work trucks there for an entire afternoon while replacing flower beds near the decorative stone columns. Every tire resting on that asphalt represented another documented violation occurring on private property after written notice had already been received. My attorney called the situation exactly what it was: predictable. He reminded me that people often ignore legal warnings when nothing happens immediately afterward. They mistake patience for surrender. I smiled because that misunderstanding had become my greatest advantage. Instead of arguing with anyone, I spent the next week building a plan detailed enough that nothing would be left to chance. I hired a licensed survey company to reinstall every official property marker that had disappeared during construction. Their crew arrived quietly on a Tuesday morning with precision measuring equipment that looked more at home on a highway project than at the entrance to a quiet subdivision. They confirmed every boundary matched the original county records exactly. Fresh survey stakes appeared along the roadway, backed by updated maps carrying the surveyor's professional seal. Those maps joined the growing stack inside my folder. Next came conversations with a local towing company experienced in commercial property enforcement. I explained the situation without exaggeration and handed over copies of the deed, survey, easement, attorney opinion, and proof of notice. They reviewed every page carefully before agreeing to participate only if every legal requirement had been satisfied. That answer was exactly what I wanted. This was never about revenge. It was about following the law so precisely that no reasonable person could challenge the outcome. My attorney coordinated with the towing company to establish the exact procedures, while I contacted the county sheriff's office to request a deputy keep the peace if questions arose during enforcement. The deputy I spoke with remained completely neutral. He explained that ownership disputes were civil matters, but if valid documentation supported private property enforcement and the towing complied with applicable law, his role would simply be maintaining order. That was all I needed to hear. During the following days, I noticed Vivian walking proudly beneath the new entrance signs, as if the project had already become a permanent victory. She greeted neighbors, complimented the landscaping, and even announced that additional improvements were being considered for the following season. Her confidence spread throughout the subdivision. Residents stopped thinking of the road as borrowed access and started treating it as common ground. The irony never escaped me. The more completely everyone accepted that illusion, the more complete the eventual correction would become. By the end of the 3rd week, every document had been verified, every notice period had expired, every survey had been updated, every contractor had confirmed their role, and every step had been reviewed by legal counsel. The plan was no longer an idea sitting inside a file cabinet. It had become a carefully organized sequence waiting for one final ingredient. All I needed now was a morning when enough unauthorized vehicles would be parked on my property for the truth to become impossible for the entire neighborhood to ignore. The opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. Willow Creek Estates hosted its annual summer block party on the first Saturday of the month, and nearly every family invited friends from outside the neighborhood. Food trucks lined the clubhouse parking lot. Children laughed around inflatable games. Music drifted through the warm evening air while strings of decorative lights stretched between oak trees. By sunset, the official parking areas had filled completely. Exactly as they had during every previous community event, volunteers directed arriving guests toward the wide, freshly paved entrance road. My road. One after another, sport utility vehicles, pickup trucks, luxury sedans, and family crossovers settled neatly along both shoulders until the entire stretch looked like a dealership inventory lot. I counted each one carefully from my porch. 58 vehicles. Every license plate had already been photographed. Every required notice had already been delivered weeks earlier. Every legal deadline had already expired. At 4:30 the following morning, while the neighborhood remained completely silent, the first tow truck rolled quietly onto the property with its amber lights glowing softly against the darkness. Then another arrived, and another. Before long, a coordinated line of trucks waited exactly where the survey markers identified the beginning of my private roadway. The towing supervisor stepped out, compared the property survey with the recorded easement map one final time, and nodded toward me. The deputy parked nearby remained calm, reviewing the same documents my attorney had already provided in advance. There were no raised voices, no dramatic confrontation, just professionals confirming that every step matched the law. One by one, the tow operators connected each unauthorized vehicle with practiced efficiency. Steel arms lifted tires carefully from the pavement, while hydraulic systems hummed steadily in the cool morning air. Within minutes, the first truck pulled away. Then another followed. The operation continued with remarkable precision until the final vehicle disappeared beyond the county highway, just as the eastern sky began turning orange. By 7 o'clock, garage doors throughout the subdivision began opening. Confused homeowners stepped outside carrying coffee mugs, expecting another quiet Saturday morning. Instead, they found empty spaces where their vehicles had been parked only hours before. The peaceful atmosphere disappeared almost instantly as neighbors called out to one another, searching every nearby street. Some assumed the cars had been stolen. Others believed they had parked in the wrong place the night before. Several hurried toward the entrance, only to stop when they noticed the deputy speaking calmly with residents beside the freshly installed survey markers. Vivian arrived moments later wearing running clothes, clearly expecting an ordinary morning walk. The confident smile she always carried disappeared the instant she saw the empty roadway. She demanded an explanation before looking directly at me across the pavement she had ordered built. The deputy handed her copies of the recorded survey, the deed, the easement agreement, and the certified notice receipts. She turned each page more slowly than the last. Around us, tow company representatives politely explained where every vehicle had been taken and how owners could recover them according to standard procedures. Nobody argued with the paperwork because there was nothing left to argue about. The same road everyone had confidently claimed for weeks had never changed ownership at all. The asphalt had looked permanent. The stone entrance had looked official. The decorative signs had looked convincing. But underneath every improvement, every parked vehicle, and every assumption, the law had quietly remained exactly where my father placed it nearly 40 years earlier. The following week felt strangely quiet. The neighborhood that had spent months treating my road like common property suddenly avoided it altogether. Temporary signs appeared directing visitors to use the original subdivision entrance, while conversations grew noticeably softer whenever I walked past the clubhouse. Within days, the Homeowners Association's attorney contacted mine with a request for a formal meeting. This time there were no glossy renderings, no speeches about community vision, and no assumptions disguised as plans. Spread across the conference table were the same documents that had protected my family for decades. The recorded deed, the survey maps, the easement agreement, the certified notices. Every page told the same story, and every story reached the same conclusion. Ownership had never changed. By the end of the meeting, the Homeowners Association agreed to remove every decorative improvement installed on my property without permission. The stone entrance columns came down first. The banners disappeared the following afternoon. Contractors carefully removed the community signs that had stood where my old wooden marker once welcomed only. Invited guests. A few weeks later, another construction crew arrived, but this time they were working under my written approval. They milled away the asphalt that had covered the original limestone base and restored the private roadway according to the specifications documented in the settlement agreement. The familiar sound returned with the first truckload of fresh gravel. Every tire that rolled across it produced the same crisp crunch I remembered from years earlier. It was a small sound, but after everything that had happened, it meant more than silence ever could. Vivian resigned as president of the Homeowners Association before the next election cycle. I never celebrated her departure because this had never been about humiliating one person. It had always been about correcting one decision. Several neighbors eventually stopped by my porch to apologize for assuming the road belonged to the community. I accepted every apology because most of them had acted on information they believed was true. One retired couple even brought over homemade peach cobbler and admitted they had never questioned the new entrance because it looked official. That sentence stayed with me long after they left. Looking official and being legal are not the same thing. Before the matter was finally closed, I replaced the old weathered sign my father had installed decades earlier. I had a local craftsman build a new cedar post with simple black lettering carved into polished white oak. It read exactly what the original had said, only this one included a smaller line beneath it. Private road. Authorized access only. I stood there one evening watching the sunset paint long shadows across the gravel while a gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar and fresh earth through the trees. For the first time in weeks, no unfamiliar vehicles crossed the entrance. No decorative banners flapped in the wind. No one questioned where the property line stood. My father used to tell me that the strongest boundaries were not built with concrete or steel. They were built with patience, preparation, and the willingness to let the truth speak for itself. Standing there beside that restored road, I finally understood exactly what he meant. Justice had not arrived with raised voices or dramatic confrontations. It arrived through records preserved for 40 years, careful decisions made at the right time, and the simple fact that real ownership does not disappear just because someone else decides to pave over it.